Okay, so this is the transit for today. I'm in New York, obviously. So this is the chart we're going to work with as we're teaching, kind of a new energy. We had a nice full moon last night. We've got Jupiter in Aries, so a lot of information. Capricorn rising with Saturn here. Hopefully you'll leave with things of value that you can use. And we can see there's a nice little mystic rectangle in the sky, which is all about us following our path. So here you are on a Saturday afternoon, having an astrology webinar. So what we're going to talk about is a thing called great cycles. But first, we're going to kind of review where the orbs are. And 88 days for Mercury to zip around the sun, 224 days for Venus, about 22 months for Mars. Of course, the sun goes around the chart in 365 days. 11 and a half years for Jupiter, 28 years to 30 years for Saturn. Chiron, 49 to 50 years. He's an elliptical orbit, so he can vary in terms of how long he stays in a house. So you kind of want to always kind of pay attention to that shift. Uranus, 84 years, Neptune, 164, and 248 years for Pluto. So we know these are the big cycles as the planets run around our chart. So obviously in the human life, you might make Uranus. You're not going to make Neptune and Pluto. But if you're like Jane Austen, who was 1776, 1775, you've got you can have a Pluto return. She's having a Pluto return right now, and she's kind of popular in the culture. So charts continue to live after you're dead. The other thing that happens is when the big planets come together, and by the big planets, I mean Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. When they connect, they start what's called a great cycle. There's a wonderful book called Mundane Astrology by Harvey Mundane, Campion, and somebody else. I'm blanking on the name, but it talks about great cycles. And what great cycles are when we look at a planetary union of the outer planets and they start a new story. When they meet up, whenever there's a conjunction in the sky, we start a new chapter, we start a new cycle. And one of the features of this last couple years is we've had a number of great cycles starting. Some of them are further along, and they start when they meet up. So we look at the location of where they meet up, what they're saying they want to accomplish in this time. And then, of course, we always look back at our history, because even though we're here in 2022, a lot of the stuff that we had activate is from earlier times. It's completing, it's finishing, it's going to the next level. So there's a lot of energy when we're looking at a chart and we're looking at a great cycle coming together, that conjunction. And then once they form the conjunction, they do this shape of the lunation cycle. And you saw there was a lunation presentation out there by Stormy Grace on the YouTube channel. So go look at that. The lunation phase is we put the slower planet, we treat that like the sun, and then we take the faster moving planet as it moves away. It has an opening square and it moves opposite as a full moon like we had last night. It moves up to the Capricorn energy, the closing square, and then it comes back in. So we look at the conjunction as the beginning of the cycle, and we say, okay, let's launch this, let's start this, let's get this out in the world. And then we watch that chapter phase. We watch it go through the phases, similar to the way the sun and moon dance, the planets dance too. So it's important to look at what that conjunction meant and then look back in time to the earlier ones. So we're going to demonstrate it a few different ways in this presentation to give you ways to kind of go and approach things, because this last couple years we've had like all these great cycles start new chapters, which is why the world feels very crazy. And so when people say to you, because they know you know astrology, they say, is it Mercury retrograde or something? You go, no, there's all these new cycles starting. We're kind of at the beginning phase, but what that means is there's lots of endings. Because remember, when a planet comes in to go to the new moon, it's releasing an ending, and then it initiates a new chapter, and then the planet moves away from the planet it joined based on the speeds of the planets, and it opens up a whole new story. So we're at the beginning of a whole new series of conjunctions. Now, in astrology, we know the personal planets are Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the sun and the moon, right? So we consider those your personal. Those are your planets about how you do things. And of course, Mercury and Venus are real near the sun. And so their communication, there's what you love, what you're passionate about, what you value. They next to the sun, and they help the sun speak. Moon can be anywhere in the chart relative to the Mercury and the Venus and the sun. And Mars can be anywhere in the chart relative to those guys. And those are your planets. Moon is how you feel, what your purpose is, your past lives, you know, what you're coming in with an historical knowledge of knowing how to do. That's why we go to the moon for comfort. We go, okay, what's your moon? Okay, you want to feel better, go do that. You're really familiar with your moon energy. And then you're learning how to be your sun in this lifetime. So a lot of times I'll have Libras say to me, I'm supposed to be good at relationships. I'm like, well, you're learning how to be in a relationship in this life, right? And then the Mercury, Venus, and Mars are how you communicate it, what you value, and how you go and get it, because Mars is the go and getter planet. Those are considered personal. When we get to the Jupiter, it's 12 years. Jupiter is a long time. You know, think about how you're different from age 0 to age 12, 11 and a half. And every 12 years, Jupiter resets. And he says, let's start again. And in your natal chart, he's going to go pick up a new planet that he plays with for 12 years and teaches them, because Jupiter is the greater guru, the wise teacher. It's all the kids that you were in the same grade in first grade, second grade. And if you're a teacher, you know teachers, they always say, oh, this class is the wild class. This class is the study class. This class, you know, because classes have categories and they go through, you know, the teachers all know what they're getting, you know, from the next, you know, as you progress in the grade. So Jupiter is everybody born in your year has the same Jupiter. And if you correlate it to the Chinese animal system, you know, we're in the, you know, what are you? I'm a horse. It's the year of the tiger. You know, it's a 12-year cycle, and there's 12 animals in the Chinese zodiac, and that's correlated to the Jupiter. Saturn, it spends 2.5 years in the sign. He takes 29 years to go around the chart on average, anywhere from 20.5 to 30, because he's a little elliptical. But what he does invite us to do is he's why mortgages are 30 years. You know, you're going to sell your house. Half of his cycle is 14.5 years. And a lot of times relationships come to crossroads at that time. He's where the 7-year itch comes from. Divides that cycle by 4, you get 7 years. And of course, 7 years is when you know right from wrong and you go to school. 14.5 years is when you kind of look at your parents in the school and you go, yuck, I want to go hang out with my friends. And back in the old days, we used to be apprenticed at age 14 to learn a trade. At 22, you're finished with your education, you leave your peer group and you go out into the wider world. And 22 to your Saturn return at 29, you're figuring out who you are. When you have your Saturn return at 29, and that's very popular in the culture these days, you go, oh, now I know what I'm here for. And then you do it again. And you go, okay, 7 years, 36, am I happy with what I'm doing? Corresponds to a nodal return at the same age, similarly to age 19, and then 42, 49, 57, 58, and then you do it again, and you get another 30 years. So you can have up to three Saturn returns in your lifetime. Not everybody gets to that third one, but definitely it's the structure of your life. It's your work in this life. It's the area where you're building skill and creating talent in this life. So we look at Saturn as kind of the teacher. He's a little more curmudgeonly than Jupiter, who's all about, let's have an adventure. And Saturn's more like, let's get serious. This is what we have to pay attention to. So we look at him as to pay attention to structures that we're trying to build in our life. You're about to see a cattail go by the screen. Remo is here, walking by. Come on, let's go on the couch. Come on, over on the couch. He always makes an appearance when I talk about Saturn. You have a serious Saturn in your chart, don't you? And then we have 49 to 50 years for Chiron. Remember, he's elliptical. He actually rotates between Saturn and Uranus. So that's a little why he's elliptical. And it's always important with your chart to look at where your Chiron is. Is he going from Saturn, the structure, towards Uranus? So he's taking the structures and he's breaking them down. Or is he going from Uranus towards Saturn in which case he's taking the chaos and the structures that are broken and he's trying to build a new structure from it. So we always look at your natal Chiron to see what's your work in this world and also where your wound is, because the idea of Chiron is where you're wounded. And I will say to you, when you're doing a reading, be a little careful talking to people about their Chiron, because that's the planet that makes them cry. Saturn, they kind of do the little shoulder setting and breathe. But Chiron, they cry on. So just be a little careful before you go walking around with him, because he's kind of a sensitive guy. Uranus, of course, is 84 years, and we are currently having Uranus in Taurus, but the 84-year cycle, is kind of the human, particularly the human lifespan. Obviously people go older than that, but we also have younger than that. Come on, Remo, you got to get down, hon. I know, baby. Come on, let's go. We're on to Uranus now. You go away. Sorry, it's a cat. They run the house. I'm just the assistant. So Uranus, he spends 8 years in a cycle, or 8 years in a sign rather, and as he goes around. And of course, we divide 84 in 4. So age 21, we're either serious or we're wild, and then we reverse it when we're 42, when we have the Uranus opposition. And if we were wild when we were 21, we get a little serious. If we were serious at 21, we have our quote unquote midlife crisis. We go wild, we buy a car and fly off and do things. 63, we look at our life and we say, what's the blend between wild and creative and serious? And we kind of find the mix. And then of course at 84, we have the Uranus return that says, what have you created in this lifetime? Now, remember, the visible planets are through Saturn. All these other guys, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, were found by telescopes. And Uranus was found shortly after the Declaration of Independence was signed in the 1700s. Neptune was found when they figured out microbes were what made people get infections. And they started going, oh, there's this hidden invisible world. So that was microscopes. And of course, Pluto was discovered in the 1930s when we became aware of the unconscious and we became aware of the ability to destroy ourselves. He was in the middle of the world wars, right? Where our potential with our weapons of mass destruction to do things. So Uranus has this cycle of 8 years. Neptune, 164 years. So that kind of cycles back to, it's about 14 years Neptune spends in a sign. And then 248 years for Pluto. Pluto's elliptical. He can spend up to 30 years in the sign of Taurus. And of course, he's at the short end in Scorpio. That was 13 years. So now he's elongating. When he goes into Aquarius, he'll spend, I believe, 22 years in Aquarius. But each cycle, as he goes away from Scorpio, it's a little bit longer for Pluto. But the Scorpio babies was when Pluto was born in the shortest phase. That was from 82 to 95. So now we're going towards the long end when Pluto will eventually get back into Taurus. So we look at these cycles and then we go, okay, these are big cycles, but what happens when they meet up? And that's part of what we're going to do today when they meet. So the one that just happened, which everybody really paid attention to, was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that took place in January of 2020. Now think about the natures of the planets, and we'll go into those in a little more depth in a few minutes. But Saturn is the structures, Pluto is the destruction of the structures. So we see when Saturn and Pluto meet up, that great cycle begins with destruction. So when it met up in 82, it was the AIDS epidemic. When it met up in the 50s, it was the polio epidemic. When it met up in 1914, I believe it was the Great World War. It was at 0 cancer. 22 Capricorn is a world point. So that's why this was a global pandemic. But it initiated a new cycle that's going to run until they meet up again. So we know we initiated a new cycle. We started it with the pandemic coming in, which did cause economic disruption, as well as the changes. So when we look at Saturn as the structure and Pluto as transformation, destruction, because when we're working with mundane cycles, they tend to be more unconscious and bigger, they kind of hit the world hard. we know it's a big deal. And of course, back in the 80s, when they met up in Libra in November 7th of 1982, they met up at 28 Libra, and a lot of people had us older people had major life changes that seeded that cycle. It was the Reagan years, it was Iran-Contra. It also was when we started to privatize things. And so now we see the structures kind of falling apart. Capricorn rules structures. And we're in the process of saying, well, maybe we need an infrastructure bill. Maybe we need to rebuild. And so we see that Saturn Pluto kind of saying new structures coming in. It also is, Capricorn is the sign of governments and corporations and big business. It's the 10th house. It's the authorities. So we're also going to have a negotiation, a little different than the Libra time, which is we're going to be nice about it. We're going to just kind of do it. Capricorn, we're working with really deep inner energies. Saturn's in his favorite sign. He loves to be in Capricorn. He was exalted in Libra back in 1982, but now he's in Capricorn and he's next to Pluto. So those guys are hanging out and having fun and doing things, starting this new chapter. Like I said, big major cycles starting. When we look here, there were 3 Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions that happened in 2020, part 1, part 2, part 3. And you can see here, it was almost there. Jupiter's kind of scooching into the Pluto-Saturn conjunction. But the third one is the one we pay attention to because that one is the one that sticks. So we have awareness, then we have transformation when Jupiter goes retrograde, and then when Jupiter goes direct, we go, okay. So here we have the Saturn-Pluto conjunction happening, or I'm sorry, the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction happening part 3, that was November 12th, 2020, which said, okay, we're going to shift the structure. The Jupiter-Pluto cycle, unlike the Saturn-Pluto, which is a 30-year, think 1982 to 2022, that's 30 years, and a little schmidgy. The Jupiter-Pluto is a 13-year cycle. Because when, the faster moving planet. So Pluto's the base planet, Jupiter's going away from him and setting the story forward. Jupiter does not like being in Capricorn. So this is where we learn about detriments. And, when they label detriments or planets in fall, when it's a planet in a sign it doesn't like, and Jupiter does not like being in Capricorn because he's abundant, he's exalted in Cancer. Like, why is Jupiter exalted in Cancer? Well, because he's summer, he's springtime, everything grows in the Northern Hemisphere. And he rules Sagittarius, which is the sky, and he rules Pisces, which is the ocean. And then in Cancer, he's just nice and fat and jolly. And now he's in Capricorn, so he's a little depressed, he's a little anxious, he's a little, I'm kind of feeling a little crabby, but he's hanging out with the Lord of the Underworld, who is his brother. Remember your mythology. So Jupiter hanging out with Pluto is like, all right, we're working on this and we're kind of coming up with this new cycle of physical growth in the world that after 2020, right around then was when the vaccination got discovered. There looked like we were coming to figure out how to handle it, but we still were dealing with all the economic changes that went on. The next cycle was a couple weeks later. And this one's an interesting one because this one is the December 20th of 2021, and it was Jupiter and Saturn meeting up at 0 Aquarius. Now, when Jupiter and Saturn meet up, they form a cycle that's deep and strong and long. And it tends to be a 20-year cycle. So the last time they met up was in May of 2000, and they met up at 23 Taurus. And now they're meeting up in air, and they're meeting up in Aquarius. And in a couple next year, Pluto is going to get to that point in Aquarius because he's going to shift into Aquarius next year and then be in Aquarius for 22 years after having spent since 2008 in Capricorn, right? So the Jupiter-Saturn starts a new 20-year cycle around how we're going to grow and expand. Remember, Jupiter wants to grow and Saturn wants structure. Now, one of the things that happens after a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, when the world blows up and the bombs fall and all that stuff, is there's a renaissance, there's a reconstruction. And if you go back, I have a couple different presentations that are out there on the internet in different places where I talked about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction and all the plagues that went with it and all the wars that went with it. And the Jupiter-Saturn says, okay, Aquarius, let's have a fresh vision of how we're going to do it, what we're going to do, what's our vision, what's our new idea that we're going to grow for the next 20 years. So you need to look, because 20 years is a little more reasonable than some of these longer cycles, but the next 20 years is Aquarian, and Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius. Now Saturn is still happy in Aquarius because that's he rules it, and Jupiter's comfortable in Aquarius because he has his freedom. He's not as happy as he is in other signs, and he's certainly not as unhappy as he was when he was in Capricorn. But now he's in Aquarius and he says, okay, there's a humanitarian story that we're going to be working with here too, working for the greater good of the collective, the Aquarian vision of what we want to be. And of course, as Pluto goes into Aquarius, we're going to see a whole new vision come in as part of this next chapter, because he's finishing up Capricorn next year and he goes into Aquarius just a little smidgy, and then he backs up into Capricorn for a cleanup, for lack of a better word, and then he goes into Aquarius where he lives happily ever after for 20 years, 22 years. So and he comes and activates this. So as we're watching these new cycles start, you've now seen the first cycle, which was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, similar to 1982 when Saturn and Pluto met in Libra. Now we're seeing the Jupiter-Pluto one, and then we're seeing the Saturn Jupiter one. And then the third one that just happened this year was the Jupiter Neptune cycle. Again, about a 13-year cycle, because remember, the faster planet, in this case Jupiter, is going to go zipping around, and when he catches up with Neptune, he only spends 11 and a half years going around the chart, right? So Neptune's going to move forward a little bit, and Jupiter's going to come up and catch him. So this one is, what's the vision? What's the dream? What's the new idea? Jupiter now, whereas he's happy here with Saturn, now he's really happy because he's in Pisces and he loves Pisces. He goes, oh my God, I love being in Pisces. This makes me so happy. I'm just so jolly and content. And of course, with Neptune, he's a little bit of a party boy. And of course, we've seen a lot of a lot of partying in the world, a little depression too, because Neptune can be depression. But the two of them are meeting up and they're starting a creative cycle, because Neptune is about our dreams, our creativity, our expansion, what's the vision we want to follow, how we want to go forward. So there's a lot of energy here. I got a hair in my nose. A lot of energy about the vision that we want to take. So when we look back, and again, we'll do this, again, I want to teach you this and then you can go apply it. We're going to just look at the Jupiter-Neptune conjunctions. Think about your own chart. This one took place on April 12th, starting a new cycle. And of course, it was right next to an eclipse. There was an eclipse a couple weeks later. But the previous ones, the one before, and this is how you work with these cycles. You go, okay, that cycle is important for me. Let me look back in time. So we see the earlier one, Jupiter and Neptune met up. And you can do this for the Jupiter-Pluto one. That's a little meaner. So I didn't do that one. I want to be a little optimistic here. So there was one on December 21st of 2009, Jupiter and Neptune met up at 24 Aquarius. Think about what you have, what you started back then. That cycle came to an end when Jupiter and Neptune met up in Pisces. Boom, done, finished. Now we're doing Pisces, Jupiter, Neptune. Before that, January of 97, the two of them met up at 27 Capricorn. Think about what you started then around your dreams and how you wanted to expand in the world. The one before that was at 0 Capricorn on a world point, 1984. What's the vision? What's the direction? The one before that was 0 Sag back in 71. And the one before that, depending on how old you are, was at 3 Scorpio in 58. That was when my sister was born. And that's on one of the planets. Look and see if these planets are on your chart. and what they're doing. And then the earlier cycles, 45 Virgo Libra. So you can go back and look in time when Jupiter and Neptune met and they said, let's expand this, let's open this up, let's kind of start a whole new thing. So, and then you can apply, okay, think about what Jupiter and Neptune would do. Jupiter expands, Neptune dissolves. 97, when they met up in Capricorn, that was when the internet kind of started to come in, 1995, 96. And it kind of started to destroy the structures or dissolve the structures that we think of as the stores and the shopping and stuff like that. And sometimes it's hard stuff. Sometimes it's evolution energy. Then we had 2009, it went into Aquarius, and the advent of social media was around 2005. So we kind of see it creeping in a little before, and then we have the conjunction, and then suddenly everybody's aware of social media, and we have the Aquarian, like, who's my community, who's my tribe? So we look at these cycles, and then you look at where they land in your chart. Now, one of the other things that's very important is, let's say you're looking at the Jupiter-Neptune. If your Jupiter and Neptune have an aspect natally in your chart, like in my case, Neptune and Jupiter square each other. So I can look at all of these dates and tell you important things that happened to me structurally in my life on these days, because they all were resonant, they all landed on my planets, and natally I have a Jupiter-Neptune square. So that's the other way you look at it. If you have a companion aspect, it's called a natal excitation. So even though these are great cycles that affect the whole world, on your local level, they also affect your chart. So let's say we had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction back in 2020, which we called COVID. But let's say you have a Saturn-Pluto trine in your chart. When the two of them get together, your trine gets activated. Let's say you were born in on 9/11 in 2001, going to be tomorrow, 21 years ago. There was an opposition then. Saturn and Jupiter were in opposite signs. Saturn and Pluto, rather, were in opposite signs. Saturn was in Gemini. Gemini rules 2. Gemini rules buildings. Pluto is in Sagittarius. It rules foreign. It rules high. It rules fire. We saw a plane fly into 2 buildings, right? Or 2 planes fly into 2 buildings. Oh, very literal. Those oppositions with these outer planets aren't friendly. And there's a guy who's born in the astrology community who's born the day after 9/11, September 12th, 2001. And his job is to go around and blow up things. And when he blows up stuff, everybody goes, oh my God, he blew it up. I'm like, we're in the day after 9/11. He's supposed to blow up shit. That's his job in the world. So he had the opposition. And of course, there's an energy in his chart that when that opposition, he was born with it. And what you're born with, you were born that way, Lady Gaga's song. Now, when the conjunction happens, there's a whole new implementation of the life. So when we're looking at astrology, we understand these bigger cycles are really important. So pay attention to those outer planet conjunctions. Let's say you were born in the 52-53 period. Those babies all have Saturn in Libra and Neptune in Libra conjunct. So they're here to look at the structures of the family and relationships, Libra, and Neptune dissolve them or change them or transport them or do some kind of Neptunian work with them. So we look at the natal chart and we tie it into these bigger cycles, because that's where we understand how we resonate with them. But that's also where we have a forward motion in terms of new direction and what we're doing. And I do see some hands raising, Donna, so I'm going to shut up, and if there's questions, you can ask me.
Yeah, there are a few questions.
All right. I saw the hands going up, and I'm like, Ann, just shut up for a minute, because Donna's not going to interrupt you when you're on a roll. Okay.
That's right. So I'm only monitoring the Q&A. For those of you, if you've typed questions in the or in the chat, I'm not going to read them out unless they're in the Q&A. And one of them is that they would love to hear your interpretation of Sun being so close to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction.
The Sun back in the COVID one, that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I don't know where it was, but sun, it was sun.
Yeah, it was
conjunct-
Sun, Saturn,
Yes.
Pluto, because it was in
Yeah.
it was in Capricorn. It was us all becoming very aware of what a small world we live in. You remember that exhibit in Disney World? It's a small world after all, and you kind of roll around in that little floaty boat. That's that Sun, Saturn, Pluto. It made all of us conscious, and we all went, oh wow. And I remember, I follow Mike Erlewine on Facebook, and he went, hey, get your mask, get your mask. I'm like, get my mask? What are you talking about? He's like, virus in China. I'm like, virus in China, and that's that Sun, Saturn, Pluto. And of course, in New York City's Mercury is 22 Capricorn, right? So I've been waiting, like, okay, what's going to happen when Pluto? I live in New York. When Pluto comes to Mercury, and it was boom, the virus came in. We didn't get the one from China that came in the West Coast, but we got the one from Europe that came in through, LaGuardia and Newark, our international airports. Yeah. So I think the consciousness of what a small world we live in.
Yeah.
And I think around that day, if we look, that was when they were building a hospital like in 3 days in China, that picture of all the bulldozers and stuff. And Mike Erlewine saying, get your N93 mask. And I went, okay, get your zinc, get your vitamin C. I'm like, okay, I listen to Mike because he kind of monitors that stuff. And of course that was on my stuff, so I really paid attention to it. If you followed me back then, I was very noisy about it. But also that Sun, Saturn, Pluto, it was an awareness of where we are. Notice the sun ruling the 5th down here. Of course, this is the chart cast for Washington. And, what is the response of the leaders in Capricorn? What did they do and say around that energy, right? So when we see that, we kind of go, okay, that's there. And we did see the Jupiter on the South Node, and Jupiter rules foreign. Because these charts are cast for DC. You can cast them for where you live. But I think that's what it was, because the sun is approaching that conjunction. And whenever the sun comes near a planet, there's an awareness. And you see it on a different level than you never saw it before. So when we see when we see sun involved with any of these aspects, there's an aha moment. And I would ask the questioner, do they have sun conjunct Saturn or Pluto? Because they asked that question, like, what about the sun on that? I'm like, I bet you got the sun aspecting those guys.
Thank you. Yeah. Someone has asked what happens with Jupiter, for instance, if someone was born or lives in the southern hemisphere. That change anything?
Well, you're just going to cast the chart for where it lands in your chart. Like this is for the DC chart. So you're going to cast it locally, for you, and where, you're always going to cast where the chart lives in your, where the energy in the chart lives. There's when you calculate, those of you who are studying here, when you calculate, you reverse the ephemeris when you do the math, right? You kind of do the upside down thing with the table of houses, but it's still the same planets meeting. So everywhere on the Earth, this aspect took place. It happened to be in Washington. It happened to be on the midheaven. In other places, it was in other houses. So when this hit, it was worldwide. It's like when the moon goes void, it goes void over the whole world. But where are you physically finding it located? Where is it set up in your chart, right? So it's always gonna be the same aspect. It's just what house it is. And again, house systems are an area of contention. I was raised in Placidus. I use Placidus. If you use whole sign, whatever your house system is, you're going to adapt, but you're going to adapt it for the time zone where the aspect took place. So at 5 Eastern time from Greenwich, it was on the midheaven. In Europe, it would be in the 7th house, but they'd already had the virus. We weren't really paying attention to it. It was already roaming through Italy, right?
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I mean, there's a few questions here that I think are not necessarily relevant to this presentation, so I'm going to leave them to the end so that you can have time to do your presentation. But we do have somebody wondering whether you're going to talk about the nodes, the cycles of the nodes.
I went back and forth on the nodes, and it was planets, so I left the nodes out. But the nodes are running right now. They take 19 years to go around the chart. They are very active right now because Uranus is on the North Node. We just had Queen Elizabeth die. Charles, if you look at his chart, he's got a moon in Taurus at the top of the chart. and he is in his 72nd year. So he's running his Saturn in Virgo. So he finally gets to go to work and have a job. Can't make this astrology up. There were a number of really nice, but Uranus on the midheaven, you know, is a little, Uranus on the North Node took out the queen. I mean, she, she was 96. So good life, long lived, forward she goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And earlier in the week, I do a Patreon thing where I'd said, oh, it looks like the queen and I think it's Liz Truss. I feel like that's her name. They met and they did their little thing, and she did. She transferred it from Boris to Liz, and then she went, hasta la vista, I'm out of here. So, but Charles, when he had his Jupiter return, when he turned 72, he has Saturn in Virgo. So now he's going to work, and mom left, so he gets a new job, right?
Yeah,
so,
right.
and it's Uranus on his moon. He got a promotion. His moon's in the 10th rather. So yeah.
Great. All right, Anne, we will leave you to go back to your talk now.
Okay, cool. All right, so you look at where these are in your chart. Now apply this to the other things, but remember the Saturn Pluto is like 1982. So the next one before that is the 40s, and that one was in Leo. And a lot of people say of the Saturn Pluto in Leo babies, one, it was polio. Leo is children, right? So the polio epidemic was big. And my door buzzer's ringing. I don't know who that would be. Lost my train of thought. And then polio, new babies, coming in. And a lot of people say that those babies born in that time frame were very much about never again are we going to have a war, Saturn Pluto, and of course Leo is let's create the world again where we have peace and love and all the Leo words. So, and then of course in 82, and then now in the Capricorn. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the planets and the energy of them so you can kind of think about them. Pluto, of course, is a malefic. He rules Scorpio, and some people love Pluto. I'm not going to give him a bad rep. He's in my 7th house. He and I have a pretty good relationship most of the time. But he takes 280 years to go around, 48 years to go around, and we are having the Pluto return for the United States this year, next year. As Pluto returns to where he was when the declaration for the aspirational chart, not the continental, not the government part, but the vision of what we wanted to become. Rulership is Scorpio. He's exalted in Aquarius, so that's going to be good when he goes into Aquarius next year. He's in his detriment in Taurus, and he's in his fall in Leo. And I love this image. This was a great image of Pluto, and I think it looks like a little heart. I think he's quite cute. And then here, I love this. This was an internet meme. So you dumped me years ago. Of course, remember he got demoted when Aries got him demoted at that astronomers conference. But now you're driving by my house real slow. So it's certainly a Plutonian meme. And of course, his image through the years, he's the Dark Lord. He rules the underworld. He rules gas. He rules oil. He rules all the diamonds. He rules the deep, dark, chthonic world and that uncommunicated energy. Of course, he has many images in popular culture. When Pluto was discovered, we discovered X-rays, the ability to look and see inside, to see the bone structure. And of course, from Pluto and Scorpio, from that discovery, we've now got MRIs, we've got PET scans where we're able to probe the body without actually opening it up. Of course, Scorpion is a classic image of Pluto. Now they're little, but they hide in your shoes and they bite you. But when you see them, you can smush them. And then of course, the snake is another image of Pluto where he sheds his skin and there's a big snake running through the constellation. And then of course, the eagle, the predator who flies, looks down, sees the bunny, but unless he's hungry, he doesn't kill him. And then the phoenix, where he immolates, he catches on fire, he burns up, turns into ashes, and then is recreated. And if you've ever had a good kick-ass Pluto return, that's his story. Next up is Neptune, where we're talking about that expansion energy of Neptune, where he's kind of encouraging us to expand and grow and kind of take off into the world on a greater level. Neptune in astrology is considered a neutral planet. And I will agree with that to a point. But we also want to kind of recognize that a lot of times people with a strong Neptune have a very they have to kind of learn how to work with this Neptunian energy because it is the ocean. It's not necessarily something that humans are comfortable in. I had a friend who took up scuba diving and said, she's in Aries with a Scorpio moon. She said to me, yeah, you enter the ocean, you're part of the food chain. And I'm like, like what? But Scorpio moon, she's observant. So Neptune we've given it to Pisces, but remember Jupiter ruled Pisces for many years. And it rules the 12th house, and its orbit is 165 years. Of course, 165 years ago, when film was invented, I'm from Rochester originally, that was Kodak country rather, and everybody had a family relative that worked at Kodak. And when the Neptune return happened, from that film being invented, Kodak went out of business. They declared bankruptcy, and that was it, because people don't print film anymore. But the Civil War was the first war that was, the Crimean War actually was the first war that was photographed. And then, of course, the Civil War had Matthew Brady dispatching photographers, taking pictures of people with tintypes, mailing them home. They would mail a picture of themselves home. There was a great exhibit at the Met a few years ago on, because the Civil War and the Crimean War were the two first documented wars with photographs. Neptune rules Pisces. It's exalted in Cancer, again, the expansive energy. It's kind of crabby in Virgo, and it's in its fall in Capricorn, because it really doesn't like being brought down to earth, and it really doesn't like being grounded. So there's an energy with Neptune around wanting to transcend the boundaries, wanting to float, wanting to flow. And I call it neutral because it can be affected by who it hangs out with. And, whereas Pluto is malefic, Neptune has, it's going to change shape depending on who it hangs. So my mother used to have a phrase, you're judged by who you hang with, because they're going to they're going to transform you, they're going to shapeshift you. And so watching Neptune is always helpful, especially if you're having a Neptune transit, like who are you getting brought into? And of course, he does rule deception, he rules illusion, he rules all these different changes. When you go in a movie theater and you're sitting there in the rapture, and you're crying and you're laughing and whatever, and the screen goes dark at the end and the credits roll, and you go, wow, that was a great ride, but I wasn't, wasn't real, but I got transported into it. So with Neptune right now traveling through Pisces, we're working with him. It's kind of a different kind of energy in terms of how he works. So this is a picture of him, and he entered Aries back in 1861. On April 13th. So this is the chart for when he initiated the cycle that he's coming to the end of in a couple of years. So he is going to go into Aries again. Right now he's at the last degree of Pisces. So we're at the end part of this story as he gets ready to shift out into 1861. And, back then was the Civil War. We documented the war with photography, but we are now going to have him change. Now, what happens whenever a planet's in those last degrees, this is the 1849 to 1861 phase, was the California gold rush. It was a real boom time in music in the United States and other places, but it also was a little bit of deception there with that California gold rush. You got out there, and you had to go wading in a creek and get a couple nuggets and then come back in. Now, Levi made a lot of money making pants for people because they came out and they needed to change their pants because they were wet. But the rest of the people kind of got taken a little. So I'm looking at that Neptune in Pisces and going, there's some kind of big con going on. And when Neptune shifts into Aries, we'll figure out what it is. And you want to kind of go, okay, the illusion, the delusion, the opportunity, like, what is it? It kind of feels bigger than real. And of course, you want to look in your own life and see where Neptune is, because he's going to invite you to not be delusional when he shifts into Aries, because he's coming out of the ocean and he's coming up on the beach, coming off into the water, coming into the fire. If you think about when you walk on the beach after you've been in the water and the sand's a little hot, you kind of run fast to your blanket. So he's about to shift into Aries, and that will start a new cycle. But he's at the very end of Pisces. So he's finishing up things. He's wrapping things up. He is in the Scorpio decant of Pisces right now. So the other thing you can do with outer planets is divide them into decans. So the first 10 degrees is Aries, is Pisces, Pisces. The second 10 is Pisces, Cancer. The third 10 is Pisces, Scorpio. So when he hit 20, he went into Pisces, Scorpio. So we know that Neptune in Pisces and Jupiter in Pisces are both in the Scorpio decant. So that's the intrigue, the drama, the things going on behind the scenes, the money dealing, Bitcoin, you know, it's like what's real, what's not real. And Scorpio is economic, of course. It's got an energy of the inner, of the hidden things below things. So even though that's a nice little happy conjunction in Jupiter and Neptune joined, it's a Scorpio decant conjunction. So it's got a lot of passion to it and a lot of intensity to it as part of its story. So it's always important to kind of look at, you know, evaluate your conjunctions based on that too. What section of the zodiac are they in? What are the 10 degrees? And you can even get a little more and do the dwarves, you know, go down to the 2.5 degrees. And, you know, astrology works. So depending on, you know, what you're doing on a Saturday night, you know, it's certainly fun to explore all those options. So next up, the big guy, Uranus in astrology. He can be malefic or benefic. Now I happen to like my Uranus because he's joined to Jupiter. So mine is pretty fun. And for the most part, I don't dislike my Uranus transits. I like them, but he can be mean. Some people have him in a hard aspect and he can kind of blow stuff up where you kind of are like, whoa. He rules Aquarius in the 11th house. His orbit is 84 years. He rules Aquarius. So he's happy in Aquarius. He's exalted in Scorpio because he does like to blow things up. He's in his detriment in Leo. Because think about like when he blows up your heart and you're kind of like, oh, I don't really like my heart blown up. And he's in his fall in Taurus, which is where he is now. Now in Taurus, he's got an energy with him of wanting to ground the things he blows up, or blowing up things that are very valuable, or blowing up things that we value, because Taurus is what we value. So when Uranus is in that sign, he blows up what we value, and we kind of go, well, what'd you blow that up for? That was important to me. And he's like, yeah, I know, I wanted to blow it up. So when we see him in this sign, we understand that, you know, we're looking at him being a little provocative. Now he was on the North Node with Mars there, the beginning of August, Mars, Uranus, and Taurus. Mars and Uranus and Taurus on the North Node. Think of all the stuff that went down in August when Mars and Uranus met up on that North Node. Boris Johnson got kicked out, Trump got raided, you know, all this stuff comes to light and you're like, whoa, wow, what's going on? And just think in your own life, what got blown up in your life when you had that awareness. There was like an aha moment and everybody went, wow, I never thought of it that way. And we understand Uranus likes to stir the pot. A lot of times Uranian people, Aquarian people, Uranian, I mean, you have Uranus in aspect to a personal planet. Aquarians, they just get you thinking. They say, I don't know why you think that. I think it's this. And you're like, really? You think it's that? And then you kind of go through a dialogue and they present the other side. They present the opportunity for you to look at things in a new way. So you look at where your Uranus is in your chart and understand his story. Now, this is what he looks like. Of course, there are people that think he should be named Prometheus. He should be called the Phoenix because of the crashing and burning and coming back up. He's in Aries now. We went into Aries here between 2010 and 2019, and he left and started it. So this is when he entered Aries for the first time in May of 2010. And so we're looking at him in Aries and understanding this is an initiating of an 84-year cycle. So think back to what you were doing in May of 2010, because you started a new cycle then. And by this, I mean, when a planet enters a sign, like Neptune's about to enter Aries in a couple of years, but we look back at the 1861 time when he entered Aries, that he's been now in for 165 years. When Uranus enters Aries, he says, I'm initiating a new cycle. I'm starting it. I'm standing on the world point of initiation, 0 Aries. When the sun, when the planets go across the equator, right? I'm initiating the energy. And we recognize that is a start of something. It's a match getting lit. Aries is a match. It lights the match and it says go. And of course, lighting the match on Uranus, which is a dynamic planet and a dynamite planet, and it blows stuff up. It's an energetic energy. Now, of course, Uranus is also changes in structures. A lot of times he's a disruptor. He disrupts things. So he wants to change stuff and change it into something else. He's also a catalyst for change, meaning he'll suggest things or imply things or offer you opportunities. And you go, well, if I do that, then I'm leaving that behind. And he's like, yes, very prominent in divorces, very prominent in exaltations, meaning rising to the top ahead of other people. Like if you watch the Academy Awards and you go, okay, who's having a Uranus transit today? You're going to see them rise up because they're going to, all those people were nominated, but who's having the step to the front of the row and take the award? And a lot of times it's Uranus. Indicates who's going to be the winner, because he's going to come along and say, you go separate, you go do your thing. So when he entered Aries in 210, we are now in the second sign of his. So he started a whole new story, and he's got a revolutionary energy to him where he likes to be revolutionary. He likes to get you to think in a different way. And as he initiates an energy, it's important to think about what he's doing. Now, I mentioned before that we're looking at, these planets from the perspective of what are they trying to accomplish for us? Where are we in those cycles, in those circles? So by having Uranus initiating, and then in, I think it was 19, in March of 19, March 6th of 19, Uranus went into Taurus, where he's going to be for 8 years. So right now he's pumping along in Taurus, happy little guy. He's at 18 Taurus right now. He's going to go back to 15 and then go forward again. So he's right in that middle part of Taurus, which means he's in the Virgo working decan for another few years. And then he gets into the fix the changes when he gets into the Capricorn decan, which is going to be when he hits 20 of, so that's next year. He says, okay, let's fix these changes that I initiated here in 2010. So we're watching, these are new cycles. This one's a new cycle compared to the Neptune, the Neptune in Aries, which was way old. Yep. Donna, you got questions?
I do. You must have heard me squeaking here.
I did. I heard you squeaking. Plus, I can see the count. There's more in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got, and again, I don't think we're going to have time for all of the questions, but we'll see how, we want to hear the meat of Anne's presentation, but there's a few that I want to ask here. And one of them, it pertains to where you listed the Pluto's exaltation, and I saw quite a bit of chatter going on in the chat box too. And you and I have had conversations about the outer planets having essential dignity or debility, and we don't need to debate that here. But the question is, obviously, that's a question for some people. But the question that's been expressed in the Q&A is that they have heard that Pluto is exalted. You've got Pluto exalted in Aquarius and in fall in Leo, and they heard it the other way around. I can't comment on that because I don't use modern rulers, but you do. So what do you say about that?
Well, I think of Pluto as, when we look at a planet, like what it wants to be, right? And we think of the purpose of why it would want to be in something. The exaltation is what makes it function the best, right? So like the CIA recruits people with planets in Aquarius because they can kill with no conscience. And so if we put Pluto in Aquarius and we think of him as a killer or a transformer, he doesn't care if you like it or not. He doesn't care if you're personally interested in it or not. Whereas when he's in Leo, he tends to be a little full of himself and goes, I'm the greatest, I'm the greatest. So he's not as, yes, he likes to be in Leo, but he's not as effective in Leo as he is when he's in Aquarius. You have to think about the nature of the planet. And again, this is a conversation, he's only been discovered since 1930. So you can say, no, I want him exalted in Leo. Okay, you can exalt him in Leo, but what's Pluto's function? His function is to transform, transcend, tear down, break apart. What's that all about? And so what would make better sense for him? So I kind of like that the CIA recruits Aquarians and Scorpios to kill, because they can do that without remorse. So if you watch the movie Allied with Brad Pitt, when he was breaking up with Angelina Jolie, he plays a spy. He's having dinner with her. They're in Casablanca, I think they're in Morocco and Casablanca. He sees a guy made him as a spy. He gets up from dinner, he goes over, strangles the guy at the phone, puts a roll in his mouth, comes back and sits down at the table. And I was like, wow, that's a killer. Pluto in Aquarius, detached, cold, not interested. Pluto in Leo, look at me, I killed him. What kind of serial killers do you have? What are the Unabombers, right? That's why I think you have to think about the inherent purpose of the planet. What's it trying to do? And so Pluto wants to kill things. Leo wants to love things and grow things. And, you might have, those Pluto and Leo babies, of which I'm a baby boomer too. Like they think they own the world. Well, we don't own the world. We're just a little generation rolling through. We're going to roll off. We're all going to die. We think we're great, but does the world think we're great? We did a lot of crap to the world when we're in Leo. So I kind of like Aquarius for Pluto in as exalt. But I mean, again, this is a new planet that hasn't been studied for lots and lots of years. So, I'm totally good with you guys not agreeing with me.
Yeah.
I'm Aquarian, I'm like, yeah, don't agree with me. I don't care. It's good.
Somebody had made a good comment, but with a question mark. Neptune in Pisces could be all the fake news, alternative facts, and happenings. I thought that was a really good point.
Yep.
And then someone had asked, when you say aspirational chart of US, do you mean the signing of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776?
Mm-hmm.
That is what you mean.
That's what we aspired to be, so when we look at that, it's based on the Masonic code, which is be nice to each other, you do good reputation for the kids, love your neighbor, help your friend, be a good guy. And if you look at that Sag rising chart, founding fathers, quite a few of them were Masons. Masons study astrology. They cast Washington, D.C. George Washington was a surveyor and a Mason. They laid the cornerstones in the Virgo constellation. They laid 9/11. They laid the cornerstone for the Pentagon on September 11th, 1941. All of if you look at the astrology of Washington, it's the Virgo that the government should serve the people. It doesn't always do that, but that's the vision. And you're going to come in from the farm, you're going to do the work, you're going to go home, right? Not what we have now, but that's why we're having a Pluto return. So we're looking at the vision of it and what they said they wanted to do. What was the vision of how we're going to set this up? And so if you look at the Masonic Creed and you look at the Pluto, the Sibley chart, which was the one that Ebenezer Sibley popularized 12 years after the signing, when Ben Franklin came through on his way back to the States, and Ebenezer Sibley was a Mason and Ben was a Mason. And I'm sure Ben said, we elected the chart because we're astrologers and this is the chart. And so it's Jupiter rising, Sag rising, Jupiter in its exaltation, next to the sun, next to Mercury's retrograde, but it rules Mars in Gemini. Of course, Donald Trump's sun is on Mars in Gemini, so that's the internal enemy. Saturn exalted in the 10th house in Libra. I mean, it's a nasty, delicious, wonderful chart. Moon in Aquarius, help the children, communicate well, free speech, Moon in Aquarius in the third. So that's the chart we had the vision for. Now we're coming to the end of that 250 years. We're coming in for a conjunction, three conjunctions, and we're setting up the vision for the next 250 years. So yeah, but it's an interesting chart. And so I would urge you to Google the Masonic code and then look at it with the Sibley chart in hand and go, wow, and then turn off the planets, because we found a lot of planets. Uranus wasn't there, Neptune wasn't there, Pluto wasn't there. None of the asteroids were there. They hadn't been found yet. So just look at the big 7 and then look at that chart, because it's a really juicy, delicious chart. They had a good vision, you know.
I'm going to ask you one more question, and then there's a whole bunch more questions, but I'm only going to ask you one more, and then we'll let you talk some more.
Okay.
And that is, you had mentioned with the multiple conjunctions that the last one is the one that sticks. Would that also apply to the US Pluto return due to the multiple times hit?
Yes, look at the last one, which is the one in December of this year. Now, there is a case to be made, and I will make it, and I have made it, that there's a phenomena called precession of the equinoxes. So if we look at the Pluto return for the Pluto return, we finish in this year in December. But if we look for the Pluto return to the precess chart, we finish in December of 2024. So we are in the middle, which of course is right after the election, their next presidential election. And at that point, Pluto will be in Aquarius, and he will be conjunct the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020. So it's an interesting chart, because Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020 was right after the election. And it was, you know, what's the vision we have for the country? And of course, the Electoral College was put into the Constitution as a component to support the enslaved people, and to, you know, give credit, you know, 3/5 of a person if you owned people in the South, you enslaved people in the South. So the Electoral College isn't really, it's not really democratic, because, you know, Gore won the popular election, Hillary won the popular election, Biden won the popular election, but then we get into those Electoral College things, and there's all this fighting, and suddenly it's 40,000 votes decide who the president is. So we might want to look at that Electoral College thing as we go forward with this Pluto return, because remember, after we have the Pluto return for the country, we're going to have the Pluto return for the Constitution, which comes next. So, you know, but the Pluto return, if we do the Pluto to Pluto in Capricorn, we're done in December of this year. If we do Pluto return to the Aquarius conjunction in December of 2020, that's going to be December of 2024. So it's a really interesting, dicey time. And I will say to everybody in here, register to vote, and vote, and get everybody you know to vote. 73 million people do not vote in America. And you want to change it. You want to make sure your voice is heard. You got to get all your friends to vote. And we'll see. I think Roe v. Wade's going to cause a lot of people to come out. But I also think it's an important, and again, here I'm getting into my liberal politics, but I think it's very important for all of us to think about what kind of country we want, and what we want it to look like, and what the vision is for us. Our vision, other people's vision. And of course, the Saturn, Jupiter, and Aquarius is a vision of humanity for all, because it's Aquarian. But we also know the Aquarians can be kind of cold. They can be Brad Pitt and Allied killing that poor guy in the phone booth, you know. And I'm like, wow, look at that Pluto and Aquarian. You know, it's understanding the energy of how we work with this. And again, we're at a crossroads in the world. We need to make important decisions. And so there's two Pluto. I like the Pluto return this year. It ends in December, but then we also have the next big one, which is where the Pluto has gone. So there's a thing called precession of the equinoxes, which means the zodiac moves backward a degree every 72 years. It just kind of shifts backwards against the background. Over 26,000, I think 500 years or 400 years, it goes completely around. So as we're precessing and going backwards, the Pluto for the United States has now, at precessed Pluto is in Aquarius. So, you know, if you go to your Solar Fire, your Kepler, or your software, you can do the precess chart. Look at that chart too. They're very interesting. They both are very similar. The Pluto return in Capricorn and the Pluto return in the precess chart. Now, we still have the natal chart that's there, you know, the aspirational chart, what we think we're going to be. But then we also have to look at these other charts as what we're looking at. And it's important to remember, by progression, the US Saturn is retrograde, and the US Mars is retrograde in the aspirational chart. So we're really changing our vision of who we are. And again, that's a whole lecture for another time. Okay, Saturn in astrology. He's associated with the 10th and 11th houses. His orbit's 28 to 30 years, rules Capricorn and Aquarius. He's exalted in Libra. He is in his detriment in Cancer and traditionally in Leo, and he's in his fall in Aries, right? So that's the energy of Saturn in terms of the stuff. And of course, this is a lovely little image of the guy. This one I like when you're having a Saturnado coming through your chart and he rolls through and you go, whoa, Saturn went by. My assistant's boyfriend drew that image and I love it. Of course, he's Darth Vader. He's like, he was a good guy, but he went south, but he was still a good guy, kinda in there somehow. When Saturn entered Aries back in 1996, right now Saturn is in Aquarius, so he's got, the rest of Aquarius to finish next year, and then he goes into Pisces for 2.5 years, and then Saturn goes back into Aries. So we're at the end of the Saturn cycle. You want to kind of think of the planets in terms of their phasing, right? So he's in a winter phase right now. The period of time from Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces is the winter in the Northern Hemisphere. And again, Western astrology comes from Europe, comes from the migrates through. So it is tied very much to the growing seasons of the North. No offense to our Southern Hemisphere friends. But as Saturn now is in the back end of the houses, was in Capricorn, we had the COVID, now he's in Aquarius. What's our community? Who's our tribe? Then he goes into Pisces. Saturn in Pisces is some suffering. A lot of times there's an economic depression when he's in Pisces. Plus, we're going to have Pluto in Capricorn. He entered Capricorn in 2008. He leaves Capricorn next year. When he entered, he brought down the housing market, the banks, and all that. When he leaves, he's going to say, hey, let's do it again. I'm leaving Capricorn. Let's do some more stuff. So, I would, bank, get conservative in your finances, get conscious that there'll be an economic correction next year. It's important to kind of recognize Saturn will be in Pisces, which is a little bit the sign of suffering. We also have a refugee crisis. We've got food shortages coming. Uranus is going to be in the Capricorn decant of Aquarius. And last time Uranus was in Taurus was the Dust Bowl. So there were food shortages. We already know there's going to be food shortages in Europe because the breadbasket Ukraine is being beaten up by Russia. So just know that there's an economic adjustment coming. And of course, the last one we had was in 96. Saturn was in Aries, initiating the cycle that we're in the closing chapters of, we're in the winter of. So if you think about what you began in 1996, you're now harvesting it and you're bringing it out to the greater good of the groups, to the Aquarian. And then you're going to wrap it up when Saturn goes into Pisces and say, okay, we're finishing that up to initiate a new chapter in a couple of years, in about 3-4 years from now, when Saturn goes into Aries. So we're at the back end, but remember, he just started a new big cycle around Capricorn. He met up with Pluto in Capricorn and he said, we're going to do this for a while, big guy. And Pluto said, yeah. So that's a lot of the government structures, cooperating or not, working together or not. It is a bit of the rise of the strong man that we're seeing in a lot of the conservative nationalists, give me a strong guy to follow and I'll follow him. But also it does look at, okay, let's look at those corporations and those structures and those governments and have them go through some really profound changes. So that's the energy of him and that new cycle that we're starting with him. Of course, then next up is Zeus or Jupiter. I like both of them. Jupiter is considered a benefic planet. It rules Sag in the 9th house. Its orbit is 12 years. It also rules Pisces. Pisces should be in here. Sorry, I made a typo in the slide. 11.5 to 12 years. It's exalted in its rulership in Sag and Pisces. It's in its exaltation in Cancer. Doesn't much like being in Gemini and Virgo, and it's in its fall in Capricorn. And there's our lovely guy, Jupiter out there, the big, jolly, happy guy. And of course, in mythology, he rules that Sag energy and he has that vision thing where he's like, okay, it's all about the vision. Where are we going? Jupiter is in Aries now, and he entered Aries in the spring on May 10th, and he will be in Aries until May 16th next year. Now he entered Aries and he went up to 8. And now he's going backwards. I should stop waving my hands over the mic. Now he's going backwards and he's going to go back into Pisces at the end of October for a little schmidgy. And then he's going to go into Aries for good, which is going to be this chart on December 20th of 2022. and he enters Aries. He's only in there till May. You know, he did this first part, but this is the one that is really the commitment to the next chapter. And the thing to notice is that ascendant there at 0 Aquarius in the chart cast for DC. Remember that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius? Remember Pluto's coming there? And this is right about when Pluto has his last gasp Pluto return for the US chart. It's not quite the Pluto return. It's like a few days later. But notice Saturn is in Aquarius on the Aquarius moon of the Sibley chart. And we see the Venus and the Mercury in Capricorn. Mercury in Capricorn is reality. If you've ever known anybody with Mercury in Capricorn, they're precise, they're direct, they're forward thinking, but they like it the way they like it, and you follow the rules. So this is a nice chart for that Jupiter, who is the rule keeper. He is the ruler of our courts. He is the, you know, because he rules the 9th house Sagittarius, but he also rules the 12th house. Whatsoever you do to the least of my brothers, that you do to me. So it's an interesting chart because Jupiter and the ascendant are sextile. Notice the moon up there in Scorpio at the top. We still have that Uranus playing around with that north node, blowing up stuff, right? Right now, Uranus is retrograde. Now, interestingly, when we have the Jupiter return, or the Pluto return rather, for the United States, we're going to have Mars retrograde. By progression, it's retrograde. But we're going to have Mars retrograde by progression when we have our Pluto return. So that's an interesting, and also it's on the election day this year, November 7th, there's an eclipse and Mars is retrograde there too. So we're really in interesting times, is the way I like to say it. Here, what I like about this December 20th, Jupiter entering Aries, is the sun is here on the galactic center, right? 28, 29 of Sag coordinates to that little fat chunk of the Milky Way that's dark. People that have planets at 28 of Sag or Gemini, but particularly Sag folks, they kind of channel, they kind of tune in, they're like a flywheel into the consciousness. And so I find this a very optimistic chart with this Jupiter entering Aries. Remember, this is 11 and a half, 12 years that he's going to be in Aries. And he's got got Jupiter up there, Sun in Sag, saying, okay, let's make a big picture. Let's have a vision. And he answers to Jupiter in the 2nd house, which is what's of value. But Jupiter rules the 11th house of the dreams and hopes and dreams for folks. And he rules the 1st and the 2nd house of where we're going. You know, what's of value to us as a country, what's of value to us financially. But most importantly is that lovely little ascendant there that you're going to have, that's activating the Jupiter Saturn conjunction from December 20th of 2020, even as we finish up Pluto return 1. And then of course, Pluto return by precession is right on that 0 Aquarius. So watch that 0 Aquarius over time. Whenever anything hits 0 of the fix, but particularly 0 of Aquarius, it's going to trigger that conjunction. And remember, these conjunctions are hot for a long time. What we're going to have in a couple of weeks is we're going to have this, I'm going to throw this in, it's not, I don't have a slide for it, but we're going to have a Sun-Venus conjunction at 28, 29 Libra. Now, for the last 100 years, the Sun-Venus conjunctions have been in Scorpio. And they're shifting now into Libra for 100 years. So that Sun-Venus conjunction at 28 Libra is right on the same degree as the conjunction, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction from November of 1982, which was the cycle that ended with the new Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 2020. But that 1982 conjunction was Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, new beginnings, and then the Venus-Sun conjunction says we're starting a new 8-year cycle around our relationships, and that happens at October 21st, 22nd of this year, but it's stimulating that old point. So you're gonna have memories of that time come back up, that Saturn in the November of 1982, spring of 83, going to be activated. But now you're going to have Sun and Venus come to it and say, hey, let's start a new love cycle. By the way, we've been in Scorpio for the last 100 years. And now we're going back, you know, the Sun-Venus conjunction cycle goes backwards through the sky, takes 8 years to paint, but we're starting a new chapter. So we see this energy as very potent, kind of coming in a creative way. And I wanted to just digress to that because I think it's important. So when we look at Jupiter entering Aries, we know we're starting a new cycle. And now we're going to look at, and again, apply this to your charts. When Jupiter is in the first house, we know it's the house of personality, individuality, and where you're going and how you're going forward. And Jupiter in the first house expands that area. So individuals in Jupiter in the first are jovial, friendly, optimistic, generous, cheerful, with great leadership ability. When Jupiter goes through your first house by transit, because that's the other thing, is where are these planets in your chart? If you got Jupiter going through your first house, you're going to expand. You're going to open up, you're going to go. And take these slides, apply them to, okay, Uranus in the house, Pluto in the house, anybody going through the house, this is what it's going to activate. When Jupiter is in the second house, it's, you know, they're going to bring the energy to it. So Jupiter is going to expand the money, the value, the purpose, wealthy, responsible, successful, opening up money and movable possessions, expanding things. If you have Jupiter transiting through the second. You have Saturn going through the second, you're getting serious about making money. You're doing Saturnian work. You're learning your trade. You're figuring out how to, you got Uranus going through there. You're blowing up your money. You're spending it. You won the lottery. You know, it's always, you kind of apply the planet going through the house. And I did it with Jupiter. You can do it with all of them, but where it is in your chart and how it expands things. Jupiter going through the third is all about your side-by-side relationships, your mind, your communications, your writing. It also wants you to be clever, quick-witted, adaptable, cheerful, handy, and good with words, because Jupiter's in that third house. He rules those areas. He makes them big and juicy and full. Like I said, I wanted to end optimistically. And he's in the fourth house. He's all about expanding your home, your family, your instincts, your emotional life, your foundation. Wants to expand your heritage, your folklore, maybe a little travel, because or bringing home souvenirs from foreign places. They're cooperative, peaceful, happy at home, tend to have success late in life. As he's down there at the foundation, he's setting in a new cycle. Jupiter in the fifth gives us an expansion around our creativity, our love affairs, our romance, the stuff we do for fun. It's the house of good luck, happiness, and romantic places of amusement. And it kind of expands the creativity when Jupiter rolls through that fifth house. When he's in the sixth, we get new servants, we get new employees, we get new staff, we get new dependents, we get new pets. He's a lot about small animals and the daily work that we do every day. He wants us to take good care of our health. He's very good at when he amplifies your work energy when he goes through the sixth. And he also is especially helpful in medicine and healthcare. When he's in the seventh, it's all about your relationships, your business partners, your marriage partners, also your open enemies, your agents, your grandparents, your diplomacy, your competition, your cooperation, your legal matters. And he wants to expand and give you good luck through friends, partners, or collaborative projects. When he rolls through the eighth, he's a lot about bringing things to light. Sex, death, taxes, the occult. He wants to talk to you about the bigger ideas. A lot of times this is inheritances coming in. I was reading somebody earlier this morning and they had Jupiter and I said, inheritance. She goes, yes, I just got a very large inheritance. And I quit my job. I'm like, great, you know. So it's also naked. When Jupiter goes through the eighth, a lot of times you get fun with naked. And it's in the eighth, they have success through partners and occult studies, happy dreams, and also when Jupiter's in the eighth, it's a long life. In the ninth, it's a lot about the higher mind, KeplerCollege, studying your stuff, foreigners, wanderers, athletes, gypsies, travel, transportation, different ways of thinking and transcending your boundaries. So Jupiter and people in the ninth are logical, optimistic, and expansive. Looks like there's a little typo there, but it expands that ninth house. Of course, that's Jupiter's favorite house. So he loves being in the ninth house by transit or by location. He's exalted, he's in his rulership by placement there. Jupiter in the 10th, it's a lot about career, direction, your heading in the world, your professional reputation, your status, the ambition you have. It often, Jupiter within the 10th are often moral, influential, well-connected, responsible, because it's in a Capricorn house. It's giving an energy of the solidity, the solidness of it. And so transiting, going through there, it tends to bring promotion, recognition for your career. When it's in the 11th house, it's the collective, the community, the groups, the friends, the family. It's the people that you hang out with. It's not your best friends, they're your 7th house, but it's your community who you feel has similar belief systems and views with you. It is the house of cults. And so if you look at the current cult leader, he's got a lot of planets in 11. So you kind of go, wow, why are they still? Because the planet Saturn and Venus up there lead, and of course the Uranus sun makes a cult. So the 11th house is the house of cults and children and humanitarian ideas, political beliefs, civic matters, democracy, social progress. So Jupiter going through that 11th house by transit expands things. And then last of all, Jupiter in the 12th, one of his favorite houses, he rules this house. It offers the spirituality, the compassion, the government, the superiority, the spirituality. I got to slow down, breathe in. Spirituality, compassion, selflessness, charity, empathy, intuition, the mysticism, psychic phenomena, and individuals with Jupiter in the 12th can turn their enemies into friends. And it's like having a little angel on your shoulder where he whispers in your ear and he says, you know what I think you should do? And you always get really good advice from him when he's rolling through the 12th, because that's one of his natal favorite houses. So that's kind of the presentation slides. So let's take the question.
With Saturn squaring Uranus in Taurus, how does the fact that both have their fall in Taurus affect their individual power to be effective?
Good question. They both are in their fall. And what they do is they meet up, if you go back and look at when Saturn and Uranus met up way back when, right? They meet up every cycle. So they met up right before 2000 and they were in the reverse. Saturn was in Taurus and Uranus was in Aquarius, right? So they were at that point, they were in, Uranus was in a sign he liked, Saturn was still in a sign he didn't care for. So the two of them reversed now. So we're looking back at 99 and the cycle you seeded to do the 2000 Taurus conjunction, right? And now last year they met up 3 times. They squared each other 3 times in January, February, I think it was January, then June, then December. And at that point, if you listen to my YouTube, I was talking about, well, it's go fast. The cardinal people changed in January, the mutable people changed in the June time, and then the third square was the fixed people got dragged kicking and screaming. So those were exact squares. It's not going to be exact this fall, but what they're doing is they're getting close enough to each other. They're kind of breathing on each other. It's kind of like you break up with someone and then you see them on the street and you go, do I say hi to them or not? And you might or you might not, but what they're doing is they're reminding you of the changes that you said you wanted to do last year. Did you do them? Are you finished with them? And when it's a square, it's got a banishing energy. And Saturn, as he's coming in Aquarius, he's coming in a closing square to Uranus. So the opening square was back in 99, where they were building something. The closing square is when they're looking what's built and saying, is this working for me? Let me change it before I go on. And Remo comes over. Whenever I talk Scorpio, he's just here. Come on, let's go. I know you just love to help. So now they're in a closing integrative psychological square. And they're asking you, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about the changes you said you wanted, or the changes that were proposed now that they've happened? And of course, because both planets are not happy, well, Saturn's more happy than Uranus is, but because Saturn likes being in Aquarius, he's not unhappy being in Aquarius. So he's a happy guy there when he's in that sign. And last time in 99, Uranus was happy because he likes being in, he's okay with being in Aquarius. So it's not a bad sign for Saturn to be there, because he's like, well, I blew up all your structures with the conjunction. Now you have an opportunity to make some changes and grow things. because Uranus is now in a growth phase because he's in Taurus's sign. So I don't think it's bad, but I think this fall we're having an opportunity with Mars retrograde to go, well, you know, you said you were going to do it. Did you do it? And you're like, no, not yet. Well, are you going to do it? Well, I don't know. I don't know if I want to do it. You know, and so kind of understand that psychological integration that's taking place is really important. And it's kind of a check back in for you to go, yeah, that's, I did want to do that. I better get my little butt in gear and go do it. And then of course, when Jupiter goes into Aries, he goes, okay, let's grow things. Because he's in the last, you know, he kind of started, but he goes, you guys haven't cleaned up your mess yet. We can't go until we clean, kind of like you can't go until you clean the kitchen up. Can't cook in a dirty kitchen. Come on, clean it up. So you got to clean it up by December 21st. When Jupiter goes back into Aries, he goes, let's go. And you're like, okay, we're going. That makes sense?
Yeah, that's awesome. The Saturn-Uranus square coincides with Mars-Neptune square. Any thoughts on this?
Well, the Mars-Neptune is what am I doing and why am I pursuing this dream? So a lot of people have been with Mars-Neptune coming to do that square. Remember, it's not exact though. It's like, oh, I got deceived, or oh, Neptune when Mars are not friends. Mars is in Gemini. He's not necessarily telling the truth. A lot of people are catching people lying or in fibs or doing things that aren't quite right. And, you know, Mars and Gemini is not a truth-telling Mars. No offense to the Mars and Gemini people in the room. A lot of times Mars and Gemini are undercover cops, or they're people that, you know, assume an identity to be doing something else, you know. So there's positive versions of it too. I don't want to pick on Mars in a sign. Sibling rivalry sign. So we're looking at the sibling rivalry with Mars squaring Neptune, saying, what's your sibling rivalry issues? And how are you comparing yourself to others? Why aren't you just doing your own thing? So I was talking to a friend of mine at UAC, and he was talking about having older siblings and a big gap between him and the siblings. And he said, you know, I was aware of my siblings being successful in these areas. And I stopped and I said to my mother, what am I good at? What, you know, they're all good at that. What am I good at? And his mother thought for a minute, and she said, you're good at thinking. So Mars in Gemini has the ability to look at both sides of the story. And he said to me, it was really helpful that she said that, because she really thought about, like, what am I good at? And he's a really good thinker. And he always, whenever I talk to him, I always walk away enlightened or thinking about things in a different way. So that Mars in Gemini squaring Neptune encourages you to look at both sides of the story, to understand where there's a desire for a little deception, because, you know, Neptune is in Pisces, but we know Neptune's shifting soon. And the last time it was in Pisces was the California gold rush. Got a lot of people to move to California. Not a lot of people found the gold, but they made them take action. And I will say to you, sometimes when you have a Neptune transit, you know, I have one friend who's a little curmudgeonly, and she's like, it's a Neptune transit, I'm not doing anything. I'm like, all right, I don't want to be deceived. I'm like, all right, you know. So you want to kind of think about how you feel about Neptune. Me, I like to watch America's Got Talent and cry. You know, it makes me happy. But it's Mars is like, how do you, you know, what's the rapture for you? And Mars squaring Neptune, it's an opening square, right? So Mars is looking at Neptune and going, I want to take action and do something. And so it's an action oriented about taking action for your dream. So I don't think that's a bad thing when Saturn and Uranus said your dream is adjusting. You don't have the same dream that you had back in 2000. You got a new dream. What do you want to do about it? So there's an interesting energy when the two blend.
And writing out an outer planet transit is a pretty long wait anyway.
Yes, totally. Yes.
All right, I'm going to ask one last question and then we will release you. Can you expand on 22 Capricorn as being the world point?
Okay, there's a system called Uranian astrology or symmetrical astrology or cosmobiology that's got multiple names because we're astrologers and we name things multiple times. So what happens when you do a 90-degree dial, which is a technique that is propagated by the Uranians, 0 of the cardinal is a mutable point. and then 15 of the fixed. So those of you who are into magical practices or Wiccan, that's the cross quarter days. So 15 of the fixed is the cross quarter, opposite 0 of Aries on the 90-degree dial. And we celebrate them, Beltane, Lammas, you know, that Candlemas, and I never say the last one right. I'm going to say it and you're going to go, that's not how you, Samhain, whatever, that one on, the one on what Jahoozy on
30th. Yeah.
On Halloween, that guy.
Yeah.
What we do is we go, okay, that's a cross from 0 Aries to 15 of the fixed. Then we draw a cross of matter. So it's 7.5 of the mutables and it's 22.5 of the cardinals. So that's a fixed cross, and it's an action point. It's a world fame point. It's people knowing about it. So the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn at 0 Cancer back in the world, in the first one, the 1919 pandemic, was at 0, and of course world wars, and then the 22 Capricorn, 22.5 of the cardinal signs, any cardinal sign, is a world point from the, you know, by drawing a cross of matter, which we see in our Mercury and our Venus and our Jupiter and our Saturn and our Uranus and our Neptune and our Pluto. We have cross of matter and everybody except for Mars, because he's by himself, and the moon and the sun. But the cross of matter, when we put it across the cardinal lines and we do a 90-degree dial and we take in the cross quarter days and we take in the, and it also correlates to an action point. It's an, I want to say it's an 8th harmonic, but don't quote me on that. It's a square. So it's an action energy and it takes you out in the world. So when you have planets at the 22 of the cardinals or 7.5 of the mutables, those are points of fame in a chart, or points of notice or worldwide attention.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I know there's a bunch of people here that still have questions, and I'm sorry, but we're already like, 20 minutes over our allotted time. I would suggest, if you have questions for Anne, you do readings, right? You do readings for people.
Yep.
Do you have your website or contact information on one of these slides?
No, that would make sense. It's Ann Ortelee at annortelee.com. So email me at ann@annortelee.com. That's the best way. Some people message me on Facebook. That's not a good way to get me. So do Ann at annortelee.com, because that's the one I read. Every now and then I go into Facebook, I go, oh, that was really old. I didn't see that one. Too many ways to communicate. I'm a Virgo. I do it my one little way. So email me at Ann with an E at annortelee.com. And if you have a question, I'll answer it.
Yeah. And there were many questions here that sounded like they were relating to personal charts. By all means, book a reading with them.
Book a reading. Yep.
Book a reading. And of course, the class we talked about, if you want to sign up for that, I can assure you that Anne teaching this class for KeplerCollege, she's doing it for love. She's doing it out of her love for you. It's not about the money. There's nobody that teaches at Kepler that's doing it for the money. So you would certainly enjoy that class. And Anne, I wanted to tell you that so many people have messaged in to wish you a happy birthday.
Yay!
So happy birthday to you tomorrow.
Yes, I have a wonderful solar return. I'm really excited about it. So
yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this for us. We hope you have a wonderful day tomorrow.
Thank you.
And a nice evening tonight. And thank all of you for joining us.